Welcome back to the new series. In the last episode, I covered Mexico's central region. This included the states of Michoacán, Jalisco, and Colima. There, we focused on CJNG and how they overtook the region. We saw how wild central Mexico can get and how much power El Mencho holds. But for this episode, we cover a whole different part of the map. A region that was once considered a great place to live, but these days it's completely off limits. In 2022, no one is advised to visit the region. Find out what led to this problem in this episode of Swamp Stories. So join me as I take a trip to northeastern Mexico. The region consists of 3 states, Coahuila, Nuevo León, and Tamaulipas. Culturally, this region is much different than the rest of Mexico. Many people will actually say that it resembles Texas more than it does to its own country. That's because this is where the cowboy culture began, known as vaqueros in Spanish. The area was home to many Spanish conquistadors who brought over horses and the culture of ranching. Because of this, researchers estimate that northern Mexicans have 65 to 80% European heritage. Essentially, the region is a mix of Spanish and indigenous people blended into the beautiful mestizo culture. As a result, northeastern Mexico has mainly consisted of cowboys and ranchers who love their land and livestock. They tend to wear cowboy boots, drive big trucks, and love to party, similar to the culture across the imaginary line. The beautiful region was known for its stunning landscape and great fishing, making it a large tourist destination. However, in the past quarter century, the area has gained a much different reputation. Northeastern Mexico has been completely overtaken by cartels, to the point where the Mexican government highly advises you not to visit. It's gotten so bad that former fishing towns are now classified as do not enter zones. On October 5th, the US Department of State issued a severe travel advisory for the state of Tamaulipas. They believe that Mexican authorities are not capable of protecting tourists, let alone their own residents. It has gotten completely out of hand, and authorities blame it all on one cartel, an organization that conquers territory with no remorse, overtakes rival cartels, and gains major profit along the way. If you thought the last video was crazy, this one may surprise you even more. The story begins way back in 1930 with a man named Juan Guerra. Juan was born and raised in the border city of Matamoros. The small city is located directly across from Brownsville, Texas, which was very important for Juan's trajectory. His family was well connected politically in Tamaulipas and in Texas as well. Juan was always ambitious, and by the age of 15, he found a way to make a lot of money. And with his family's connections, all of this was made possible. At this time, alcohol was banned in the United States. However, this didn't mean that Americans stopped wanting to drink it. So in 1930, Juan began traveling across the Rio Grande River and bringing over barrels and barrels. Well, after a few months of traveling alone, he knew he needed some helping hands. So he recruited friends and family to help him out with his hustle. He paid multiple people to do the deliveries for him, and this way he was able to elevate his profits. And this was the creation of Mexico's very first cartel, the Gulf Cartel. During this process, Juan Guerra became very rich and powerful, and subsequently the Gulf Cartel grew larger and larger. However, after 3 years, the US repealed prohibition and Juan no longer had a way to make money. He had to find new methods to replace what he used to have. So he began stealing cars, opening gambling houses, and doing petty activities to make money. Of course, this would never amount to anything close to his old hustle. So the Gulf Cartel remained stagnant for quite some years. As a result, over the next 40 years, Juan lived a relatively peaceful and incarceration-free life. However, the Gulf Cartel would change course in the 1980s. With the United States' new demand on Snow White, the Gulf Cartel would fully take advantage. Juan Guerra discovered that they could potentially make billions of dollars, but by this time he was already getting old. So he gladly passed over leadership to a man named Juan Garcia Abrego. This guy was commanding and knew how to make big money. During his tenure, Abrego took the Gulf Cartel to major heights. He turned them into a multi-billion-dollar organization in just 16 years. But his leadership would come to an end in 1996. After a major sting operation, Abrego was arrested in Monterrey. At this moment, the Gulf Cartel had a big decision to make. Juan number 1 was retired and realistically too old to come back. And of course, Juan number 2 was in American prison. And here is where the Gulf Cartel had a major problem. Both leaders were highly respected throughout Latin America. They were trustworthy people who kept strong relationships in Colombia and the United States. This isn't a business that's heavily reliant on strong relationships. So after their departure, someone highly respected had to step up. Unfortunately, this would be a difficult task for them. After 1996, the cartel tried out different leaders, including Juan Abrego's brother, but every leader they chose never really had command. That was until one of the temporary leaders made a wild decision. Let me introduce you to Osiel Cardenas Guillen. This guy was once a hardworking mechanic in Matamoros. He was longtime close friends with Juan Abrego, and this connected him to the Gulf Cartel. So after his arrest, Abrego asked him to take out a rival named Salvador Gomez. Abrego wasn't counting on him to do it, he was just trying to see if he could be the right one to lead the Gulf Cartel. Well, Osiel completed the mission, and this got him the leadership position. Like I said before, his first decision as a leader was wild and never done before. He set up a meeting with Mexican Army General Jesus Rebollo. In the meeting, he attempted to recruit the army to help him out. Yes, the leader of a cartel asked the Mexican army to help him out. It may sound crazy, but it actually worked. So from here, Osiel successfully recruited Mexico's GAFE. This is one of the country's 4 specialized army units. They were led by Arturo Guzman de Sena. This guy was cold and he wanted to work with Osiel. So with his help, the Gulf Cartel was able to recruit 30 members to their military wing. And here's how Osiel got them to do it. Osiel promised to more than double their military salary. And on top of this, Arturo's leadership helped recruiting as well. The GAFE members only had one request. They wanted their own identity, separate from the rest of the Gulf Cartel. So Osiel and Arturo decided to call them Los ZETAS, meaning the letter Z in Spanish. Osiel was in the midst of creating the most powerful cartel Mexico had ever seen. Prior to this, cartels operated similar to gangs in America. But now with the GAFE, things were taken to a whole new level. So let me break down the structure of Los ZETAS. Arturo organized them just like GAFE. This meant that every member had a code name, starting with Z and then their assigned number. For example, Arturo was Z1, meaning number 1 in charge. Every Z had a specific role, all assigned by higher Zs in ranking. Well, out of the gate, Osiel had them handling heavy tasks. At the time, their biggest competition was Los Chachos, a subgroup of the Milenio Cartel. This subgroup was in charge of all exports going through the Matamoros border, and the Gulf Cartel wanted to eliminate the competition that Los Chachos were bringing. They were led by Dionisio Sanchez, also known as El Chacho, and he was once good friends with the Gulf Cartel. However, he had betrayed a previous agreement, and this did not make Osiel happy. May 12, 2002. Arturo and his Zetas drive into the city of Monterrey where El Chacho resides. They surround his house while Arturo allegedly takes the lead inside, and there they force El Chacho to come with them. 2 days later, he was found in Nuevo Laredo. This incident shook up Los Chachos, but more importantly, the Mexican authorities were all over it. They knew Arturo very well, and the fact that he left the army to join the Gulf Cartel did not make them happy. So they made sure to keep a lookout on him at all times. November 22nd, 2002. Arturo de Sena goes to his favorite restaurant in Matamoros. He sits down, enjoys a meal and a few drinks, and then he decides he wants to visit his mistress just 3 blocks away. So he orders his Z's to block off the pathway to her house. However, little does he know someone in the restaurant had reported his location to GAFE. So as he leaves the restaurant, the Mexican army is right there. This incident was major news in Tamaulipas because this was against military procedure. However, in a country like Mexico, this doesn't really matter. So after the passing of Z1, Z2 took over the Zetas. This would be a man named Rogelio Pizana, also known as El Quelín, and Los Zetas continued like nothing had ever happened. This was the difference between them and any other cartel. They had military structure, meaning that when one goes down, the next is expected to fill his shoes. On top of this, there was no debating on who was up next because the Z order did that naturally. So in response, other Mexican cartels followed suit with this strategy. In fact, the Sinaloa cartel created their own version of Los Zetas, known as Los Negros. And no, I didn't say... Well, the madness of the Gulf Cartel would continue through 2003 when the United States decided to step in. The FBI and border security became fearful of the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas due to their proximity to Texas. So they classified Ociel Guillen as one of the FBI's top 10 most wanted men. They even offered $2 million for anyone who would give up information. On March 14, 2003, the Mexican army planned to finally capture Ociel Guillen. And here's how they did it. Typically, Los Zetas knew every government operation before it occurred. That's because they were known to pay off employees for insider information. However, this time President Vicente Fox kept his operation a secret, even from his own military. Only he, his Secretary of Defense, and Attorney General knew about the operation. But even after keeping it a secret, there was still a barrier to capturing Ociel. What is his current location? Well, Los Zetas Z2 was a man named Alejandro Betancourt. He was a former Special Forces pilot who was recruited by Arturo. Well, according to multiple online documents, it's believed that Alejandro was giving the government Ociel's locations, and this may have led to his capture on March 14. Ociel Guillen was sentenced to Mexican prison. However, the United States was not satisfied with Mexico's punishment. The Mexican government sent him to La Palma, where he continued to run the Gulf Cartel. While there, he became close friends with Benjamin Felix, leader of the Tijuana cartel. So with this relationship, they created an alliance across northern Mexico. After receiving this information, the FBI extradited him and had him sent to US prison. There, they sentenced him to 25 years in federal supermax. Well, following the extradition of Ociel, the Gulf Cartel kind of lost its way. Meanwhile, Los Zetas were growing larger and larger. So by 2010, Los Zetas had certifiably grown larger than the Gulf Cartel. And not to mention, they were making more revenue. Well, this didn't make the Gulf leaders happy, and they instigated a split between the two sides. Here's what they did. They began hanging posters throughout the state of Tamaulipas, claiming that Los Zetas are dangerous and conducting acts that the Gulf Cartel does not approve of. On top of this, they accused Los Zetas of targeting civilians, not only rivals. This did not make the Z's happy. And unfortunately, what seemed like desperate claims against Los Zetas ended up being true. What's mentioned next is one of the worst incidents I've ever heard, so I'll proceed with caution. As many of us know, millions of migrant workers travel from South and Central America every year. And along the way, these people can face all sorts of awful encounters. And this story is the epitome of the situation. August 24th, 2010. A group of 75 workers from Ecuador have been traveling for 7 days as they enter the state of Tamaulipas. They travel on a dirt road through the city of San Fernando. That's when members of Los Zetas stop them in their tracks. They tell them that their journey to America is now over, and now they have two options: give us your money or join Los Zetas. Of course, these people have no idea what Los Zetas is, and they don't have any money either. So Los Zetas makes a horrible decision. Out of the 75, only 3 made it out. No one would have known about this if it weren't for one guy who ran away and hid. The man then ran to the nearest town and alarmed police. So the local police arrived and could not believe what they were witnessing. Nothing of this magnitude had ever occurred in the formerly peaceful region. The investigations. They found that Edgar Nintiel, also known as El Huache, was the main perpetrator. And here's what they discovered. El Huache believed that the migrants were going to get recruited by the Gulf Cartel, so he did this to prevent the interaction. This investigation was extremely well put together by the local chief of police. Unfortunately, he would lose his life at the end of the year. All of this because they didn't want the Gulf Cartel to increase their recruiting. Well, after this incident, the entire community turned a dirty eye on Los Zetas. Yes, of course, the Gulf Cartel was bad as well, but they had never done anything of this magnitude in their entire history. Directly after this incident, the beautiful city of San Fernando lost 20% of its residents. Those who had money left instantly, and this was a smart decision. Los Zetas would repeat this act once again, except this time it was much worse. On April 6, 2011, 193 people were found in a warehouse in San Fernando. Just 10 days later, 12 Los Zetas members were arrested, including Martin Luna, also known as El Kilo. This prompted the Mexican government to open a military base in San Fernando. There, they stationed 650 full-time soldiers. At this point, the state of Tamaulipas was a shell of its former self. This is when families began fleeing to other parts of Mexico or even the United States. Buildings have graffiti, roads are blocked off, and many businesses have been shut down. By the end of 2011, only 10 of the original 34 Zs were still free, and 8 of those had warrants for their arrest. One of those was Z3, Heriberto Lascano, one of Mexico's most wanted men. He was the 2012 leader of Los Zetas, credited with expanding them to new regions. And that takes us to October 7th, 2012. While visiting the small town of Progreso, Z3 and his associates stop by a restaurant. A passerby notices his face and anonymously calls Mexican police. Police know they can't handle this alone, so they call in the Navy. The Navy arrives and surrounds Z3 and his associate. Things go left. The post-Heriberto era was one of major expansion. By the end of 2013, Los Zetas had near control of 11 states, and this stepped on quite a few toes. Here's who Los Zetas became major rivals with. Of course, the local Gulf Cartel, but that goes without saying. Then you have the Sinaloa Cartel, led by El Chapo Guzman. This rivalry was mainly surrounding the trade routes through Nuevo Laredo. This caused Sinaloa and the Gulf Cartel to make a truce, going against Los Zetas. Forever, Sinaloa and Gulf had been rivals, and only this could bring them together. Somewhat. And their next rivalry would be the biggest yet, what I would call the Clash of the Titans. As I covered in my last video, Los Zetas and CJNG went head-to-head throughout the 2010s. This resulted in so much loss, but thankfully it calmed down after 2016. During this time, nearly every single Zetas leader was arrested. In fact, by 2016, they were led by Z43. However, he would be arrested in 2018. After him, Los Zetas fell under the leadership of Juan Trevino, also known as El Huevo. This guy quietly led them to their most prosperous times ever. All he cared about was making money. Drama was completely irrelevant. He completely changed their ways of operation. Under his leadership, peace was somewhat accomplished, and that's definitely commendable. However, in March of 2022, Mexican authorities arrested him. This prompted them to call this one of the most important arrests in the last decade. And this leads me to one final conclusion. Clearly, the current plan does not work. You arrest one and another will take their place. It seems like a game that you can never win. I'm just saying, there has to be a better way out of this. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. And on that note, thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Swamp Stories. Peace!